you're really familiar with the combat phase. How many of you want to know more about the combat phase? Alright, so the structure of today's seminar, we're going to start by going over the steps of the combat phase. We're going to kind of crowdsource it, so we want to try to get them all up on the board in order. When David's ready for that. I think David might be ready for that.
Clear.
Roughly. After we get all of the steps of the combat phase up, I've got a few scenarios that we're going to go through, and then I'm going to kick it over to you guys to see if you guys have any other interesting scenarios for the combat phase. So, what are the steps of the combat phase? Anybody?
Beginning of combat.
Beginning of combat. All right, that sounds like a good first one. All right, so we've got beginning of combat. What's next?
Declare attack.
Declare attackers. Okay. Do we have anything special about any of the steps in the combat phase? Are there anything like turn-based actions? How many of you know what a turn-based action is? All right. So, who wants to volunteer an answer of what a turn-based action is? Nobody? Okay, a turn-based action is something that always happens, or that the game requires to happen at the start of the turn before any player would receive priority or triggers would go on the step. So, does the beginning of combat step have any turn-based actions? No. Does declare attackers step have any turn-based actions?
Yes.
What is the turn-based action of the declare attackers step? The active player declares attackers. Yes. So what happens after the declare attackers step?
Active player gets priority. Oh wait, after the step.
So we have something there. The active player does get priority in the declare attackers step. Do players get priority in the beginning of combat step?
Yes.
All right, cool. So we have the beginning of combat. Then players get priority. Then once both players have passed, we move on to declare attackers. Active player has to declare any attackers. Then players get priority. Then what's the next step? Declare blockers. Is there a turn-based action there? Okay. Yes. Do players get priority in the declare blockers step? Okay. What happens after the declare blockers step? First strike count.
No.
Oh, let's say combat damage, and then if there is creatures with first strike or double
Alone strike.
Okay, so we have a combat damage step and maybe a second combat damage step. Do players get priority in the combat damage step? How many people say yes?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many people say no? 1. Okay. Players do receive priority in the combat damage step. And the reason for this is state-based actions, like a creature going to the graveyard because it has lethal damage marked on it, those are only checked when a player would receive priority. So if we didn't get priority in the combat damage step, then creatures would stick around a lot longer than we expect them to. And that would be kind of weird. So after the combat damage step, are there any steps left after, or the second combat damage step if appropriate, are there any steps left in the combat phase? End of combat. Okay? If I am in a game, I'm the active player, and I declare new attackers, do we skip anything? What do we skip? Skip. Yes. So, at minimum, the combat phase will always consist of the beginning of combat, declare attackers step, and the end of combat. Declare blockers and combat damage are optional, and they will always happen as long as at least one attacker is declared. There's also an additional optional combat damage step, which occurs when at least one of the creatures moving into the first combat damage step has first strike, or anybody has double strike. Can we get a list of the steps up, maybe? Are there any? Yes.
It's suggested it has to be this way not a case in cleanup step. Why could the combat work the same way? Why couldn't it just,
There is, so for the cleanup step, there is a special rule, and if a state-based action would cause anything to trigger, players actually do receive priority.
Sure, but typically there is a moment in the game where we check continuous actions that take from this priority. And it could work the same way in combat actually.
I think the reason to not do it like the combat damage step is because that creates more exceptions to the rules, and in general, exceptions to the rules are harder to learn. Sure. So, beginning of combat always happens. Declare attacker step always happens. Blockers is an optional, so put an asterisk there. Combat damage step also has an asterisk. And then we put another combat damage step with 2 asterisks there. And then the end of combat step. So, my first scenario. We have the active player controlling a pack rat, a mutable, and a swarm. Anson draws his card for the turn, taps pack rat, and then taps both of his lands and pushes mutable forward. He says, attack for 4. The non-active player, Norin, says, wait a minute, you missed your chance to attack with the mutable, and calls for a judge. Anybody have a response?
He said declare attackers and then activate the
He didn't say declare attackers, he just drew his card, and then tapped the pack rat, and then tapped both lands and put the mutable, pushed the mutable forward. And then said, attack me for 4.
What's the question?
So, the non-active player says, that mutable's not attacking.
I believe the active player used a shortcut.
Okay.
So he got the pack rat first, and then got the two lands. It was basically using declared attackers.
So we have a rule in the tournament policy called out-of-order sequencing, which is sort of similar to a shortcut. He has taken a block of legal actions, and although they weren't in the correct technical order, he didn't have the opportunity to gain any information. So this is fine. Even though he has violated the technical order of the turn in what he has done by activating the mutable after he declared the pack rat as attacking, he's fine because he didn't have the opportunity to gain any information from his opponent. A little bit more about the combat rules rather than tournament policy. We have our active player attacking with a mutable and a pack rat again. The non-active player activates mutable or blocks mutable with a Burning Tree Emissary, and blocks pack rat with a 2/2 red and green Saturn token. So Burning Tree Emissary is a 2/2. In the declare blockers step, Abel activates pack rat's ability to create a token copy of the pack rat. What happens during the combat damage step?
So the mutable and the creature blocking it deal 2 damage to each other. The pack rat deals 3 damage to the satyr, you said?
Yes.
And then satyr deals 2 damage to the pack rat. Then once state-based actions are checked, the mutable, the creature blocking it, and the satyr die. Then we check the same state-based actions again, and the pack rat dies.
So there are 2 times we check state-based actions before players receive priority.
Yes.
Anyone want to disagree with that? No, you're right. That is correct. So, two-headed giant question. Abigail and Anthony are playing two-headed giant against Nelson and Nate. In their declare attacker step, Abigail attacks with Voltine Goliath, that's the 6/5, and Abigail attacks with Fabled Hero. At his first opportunity, Nelson casts Safe Passage. What happens? Safe Passage is going to be the important one here.
Okay. And the Goliath?
Yeah.
Safe Passions is cast before damage
It's at his first opportunity.
at the first opportunity.
Yes. So first of all, the question is, when is Nelson's first opportunity to cast a safe passage after he's declared blockers? Wait.
No, after declare attack. Attack.
Yes. There's no blockers that have been declared, so he's casting safe passage at his first opportunity.
In declare
Yes.
attack. Yeah. And the safe passage prevents all the damage.
Prevents all damage that would be dealt to you and I think creatures you control. The important part is to you.
Yeah.
So in a two-headed giant game, when do the attacking players go ahead?
The active team decides for each creature who is the player that will be dealt damage.
Okay.
Not who is the attacker.
Do they get to know
I
that?
have, if I have a shield on me, you can build to my other head.
Is that choice made before or after Nelson would have the opportunity to declare to cast a safe passage?
After. As damage does that.
Correct. So in two-headed giant, you attack as a team and block as a team, but in the damage step, you assign damage to a particular head. So unfortunately, Nelson's safe passage is terribly useful. All right, number 4. It's the wrong Goliath. It's okay, it doesn't really matter.
It's a Goliath. So
Yes.
there is also a rule that says by default damage is assigned to the first head, whatever
Estoy cerrando ventanas de ejemplos que ya no.
primary head. Is that when you don't say something else? And how does that?
So tournament shortcuts would apply only when you haven't said something else, and because the choice of assignment happens during the damage step, once the active team makes the choice of who is receiving the damage, then the non-active team doesn't have an opportunity to respond.
And that's no longer short. Okay.
All right, so Tromokratus is our next scenario. This one's a cool card. This is from Board of the Gods. So,
The Kraken.
it's an 8/8 Kraken. It has hexproof unless it's attacking or blocking, and it can't be blocked unless all creatures defending player controls block it. All right. So our first one here with Tromokratus is going to be in an individual game. Alex attacks with Tromokratus. Nick controls Messenger Drake. So Messenger Drake is a 3/2 flyer that says when it dies, draw a card. So he blocks. Messenger Drake dies. He draws a card, and the card is Divine Verdict. So, question is, can Nick legally cast Divine Verdict, targeting Tromokratus? And if so, when are his opportunities?
Yes.
So who votes yes, Nick can target Tromokratus? Anyone voting no can't target Tromokratus? All right, so how many opportunities, how many times does he receive priority where he can legally cast Divine Verdict targeting Tromokratus? Just raise your hand with the numbers. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. We got a lot of people saying 2. We've got one person saying 3.
One.
One person saying 1. Okay, so when can he cast it?
At the end of the combat.
End of combat, okay? Everyone agree on that one? Is there any other times he can cast it?
In the combat damage phase, after he has drawn a card.
In the combat damage step after he's drawn a card, yes, because after he resolves that triggered ability, he's going to both players will receive priority before we move on to the next step. Are there any other times?
Cast another instead. You'll get another.
We're not going to count any additional any additional priority that he can generate by casting other instance. So 2 opportunities? All right, that's correct. So this one's a fun one in Two-Headed Giant. So Anson and Abel are playing Two-Headed Giant against Nicodemus and Niall. Anson controls Trimocratus and attacks. Nicodemus has 3 creatures. They're just 2/2s. And Niall has 2 creatures that are also 2/2s. Nicodemus wants to block, and Niall wants to block, but they really want to have 1 creature back. Is there any way that they can either save a creature, or that some subset of creatures is not blocking? What are legal subsets of blockers here? This is kind of a corner case one. This is a weird rule. What you should know is that in Two-Headed Giant, when something asks for a defending player, then it's going to check for both players, and for a positive comparison, the answer is yes if it is yes for either player. So, for a question like, does the defending player control any creatures that aren't blocking? If the answer is no for either of the players, then we're good. So, can Nicodemus block with all 3 of his creatures, and Niall doesn't block with any?
Yes.
No.
So we're split here. Where's the split coming from? So, can you justify your answer?
Because if okay, if don't all the creatures block, Trimocratus can be blocked.
So this one says it's not all creatures; it's all creatures defending player controls.
But it's a defending team.
It's not defending team. It's at least one of the defending
Player.
of the 2 defending players. Yes.
Okay.
It could be more. No.
I think
The second question would be more interesting.
So, defending player becomes defending team when it's a one-shot effect. But for comparisons, you compare each player individually. So, if Nicodemus blocks with all 3 of his creatures, he does not control any creatures that aren't blocking it, and therefore he's allowed to block Trimocratus. But if Nick wants to block with 1 of his creatures, but not the other creature, then we have violated the blocking restriction. So can Nick block with his 2 creatures, and Nicodemus not block with any of his creatures? Can Nick and Nicodemus, it was Niall and Nicodemus. Can the 2 of them block with all 5 of their creatures?
Sure. That's
Okay.
the case. I think that the interesting case is, can one of them block with all of his creatures and the other one with not all?
So the question is, can one person block with both creatures and one person block with only part of their creatures? What do you guys think?
I say yes, but it seems iffy.
No.
I see. What I have said, we've fallen into a logic trap. So, is the question, does the defending player control at least 1 creature that isn't blocking, or control any creatures that aren't blocking, and any creatures that are blocking? No, that's not a very good way to state that either. So, if Niall blocks with 2 of his creatures, and Nicodemus doesn't block with any of his creatures, then both players obey the restriction, right? Each player individually obeys the restriction. However, if one of the players blocks with a portion of their creatures, and the other player blocks with all of their creatures, then one player has violated the restriction. So I'm going to go with no. If Niall blocks with all of his creatures, then still Nicodemus can't block with just one of his creatures. Let's see. Can you pull up Brimos and Legion Loyalist? All right. So we've got Legion Loyalist. Active player controls Legion Loyalist and a couple of 1/1 red soldier tokens. Attacks with all three of them, so the battalion trigger applies. The important bit here is creatures you control gain first strike and trample until end of turn and can't be blocked by creature tokens this turn. Defending player blocks with Brimos. Brimos has a trigger that says whenever Brimos blocks a creature, put a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance onto the battlefield, blocking the creature. What happens to Brimos' triggered ability?
It triggers.
Okay, so it triggers. What happens when it tries to resolve?
It resolves.
Nothing happens.
Nothing happens? Okay,
It resolves normal. Can't be.
so we have one option for it tries to resolve, it can't do anything. Can the defending player wind up with a creature? Do we have anyone who votes for defending player winds up with a creature that is not in combat? One vote for that. And do we have any votes for defending player has a white cat soldier token that is blocking the Legion Loyalist? We've got a couple of votes for that. All right. Who wants to defend their position? Anyone?
Well, since the token was put onto the battlefield, already blocking, it didn't actually block.
Okay. So what this does, this ability sets up a blocking restriction. It says can't be blocked by creature tokens this turn. Blocking restrictions apply during the turn-based action of declare blockers. Blocking restrictions are no longer are not considered when we have a one-shot effect that puts something into play blocking. So the defending player, Nicodemus this time, does in fact get a 1/1 white cat soldier token that will be blocking the Legion Loyalists. And now the active player has to decide a damage assignment order. So, yes?
Isn't the damage assignment order decided after blockers are declared? And then the trigger is not resolved yet?
Ooh, that's a good point. So, during declare blockers, after I declare my blockers, you decide if there's the damage assignment order. Sure. But that token is blocking. It has to be in the damage assignment order somewhere. So who gets to decide where it goes in the damage assignment order? Is it the active player or the defending player? Or the active player or the non-active?
Attacking
The attacking player.
attacking player.
Okay. The person who controls the single creature that is attacking multiple creatures. So, what does the active player need? So, are there anything? Is there any rules that the attacking player has to obey when choosing the order? Does the token have to go before? Does it have to go after? Does it not matter? Is it up to the active player?
It's an option to assign. So the order is optional, but when you go to the damage step, you have to put lethal damage in the first creature and then in the other creatures.
So what happens is the damage assignment order is updated as soon as the token comes into the battlefield. Once that token comes into the battlefield and is blocking the creature, then that active player, the owner of the creature being blocked, has to choose where in the damage assignment order it goes. Since there's only one creature in the damage assignment order, it can go on either side of it. There are multiple creatures in the damage assignment order, then the only rule that the active player has to obey is that they can't change the order. for creatures that are already in the damage assignment order. So if you have 2 creatures blocking and then you get a new token, it can go at the very front, in the middle, or at the very end. And then yes, when combat damage occurs, then the damage order has to be obeyed so that at least lethal damage is assigned to each creature in the blocking order. I have one more thing with blocking order. This one is going to be with Vulpine Goliath again. That's the 6/5 Fox from Theros, and 3 pack rats this time. So active player attacks with Vulpine Goliath. The defending player blocks with 3 pack rats. The active player sets up a blocking order, so there's pack rat 1, pack rat 2, pack rat 3. And the defending player knows a little bit about state-based action and actions and how the pack rats will shrink as they die one at a time. So what the active player really wants to do is assign 3 damage to the first pack rat, 2 damage to the second pack rat, and 1 damage to the third pack rat. Is that allowed?
5 years ago, yes.
Fortunately, pack rat wasn't printed 5 years ago. No death touch on the Vulpine Goliath. So it's got to be 3 and 3? Okay. So that's what I have for prepared scenarios. Does anyone have any questions about other cards in combat or rules in combat? Not a question. Anybody?
We got people distracting our viewers.
Okay. I know we started a little bit behind, so Steven Zwanger is up next.
No.
No? Adrian is up next. Excuse me. So I will give the floor over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent presentation. We appreciate it.